Jim Bob, 42, an affluent real estate developer, stands alone in a luxurious but empty mansion. His face is worn, reflecting years of hardship. In the background, the sound of a police siren echoes. A voiceover begins, "Some say money can buy everything, but can it buy trust?" Jim Bob's life of wealth and success took a dark turn when the woman he loved betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. This is the story of how a perfect life fell apart, piece by piece. Jim Bob's rise to wealth didn't come easy, but he always believed that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. Born and raised in a small town, Jim Bob was always the underdog. His family wasn't rich, but they were proud. His parents, a hard-working couple, taught him the value of building something from the ground up. With their guidance, Jim Bob excelled in school, went to college on a scholarship, and later became a successful real estate developer by his late 30s. He made a name for himself in the business world, earning respect and admiration from both friends and rivals alike. As he narrates the story of his rise to affluence, Jim Bob emphasizes that wealth was never the goal. It was the security and opportunities it brought to his family that mattered. Still, despite all the luxuries and privileges that came with his success, something always felt like it was missing. There was a longing in Jim Bob's life, a void that could only be filled by love. But even with all the wealth in the world, love had its own price. As Jim Bob looks back on his life now, standing in his empty mansion, the weight of his achievements feels hollow. The town he grew up in once viewed him as the embodiment of success, but now they see him as a fallen star. The mansion, once filled with laughter and dreams of a perfect life, now echoes with silence. It was supposed to be everything he ever wanted: wealth, power, respect, but it all crumbled away when the person he trusted most betrayed him in ways he never could have imagined. What's the point of all this wealth when love slips through your fingers like sand? It was during their college years that Jim Bob met Sue Wilson, a woman who seemed to be everything he'd ever dreamed of. Sue was beautiful, intelligent, and equally driven. Their relationship blossomed quickly, beginning with a shared passion for their studies and growing into something more intimate. Their chemistry was undeniable. Sue's charm and wit drew Jim Bob in like a magnet. She wasn't just a pretty face, she had goals, dreams, and a drive that matched his own. In the beginning, it felt like the perfect partnership. They were a team supporting each other through the ups and downs of life. Jim Bob loved the way Sue challenged him, how she pushed him to be better, to think bigger. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was a deep connection that seemed unbreakable. As their college years came to a close, they made plans for their future together. A wedding, a home, a family, everything seemed within reach. Jim Bob thought he had found the one person who would stand by him through thick and thin, and for a while it felt that way. The world was at their feet. But as Jim Bob would later come to realize, nothing is as perfect as it seems, especially when it comes to matters of the heart. The birth of their first child, Lucas, seemed to seal the perfection of Jim Bob and Sue's life together. There was a magic in those early years, a sense of happiness and fulfillment. Jim Bob describes the feeling of holding his son for the first time as pure joy. Their new family seemed like the epitome of happiness, and for a while it was. Nights spent together as a family, making memories, creating traditions, life felt complete. But with all the success and joy, tragedy would soon knock on their door. Jim Bob's parents, who had been his guiding force throughout his life, died unexpectedly in a car accident. The pain was unbearable. Jim Bob, devastated by the loss, tried to cope with his grief while keeping his family together. It wasn't easy. His work life, once thriving, now became a distraction from the emptiness he felt inside. Sue, on the other hand, seemed distant. There was a growing sense that she was no longer the woman he fell in love with. The cracks began to show, but Jim Bob couldn't see them yet. Lucas brought them joy, but the grief of losing his parents left a weight on Jim Bob's shoulders that he couldn't shake. And as Sue became more withdrawn, Jim Bob's world started to feel increasingly lonely. When Jim Bob's parents passed away, everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, suddenly seemed meaningless. The people who had helped him become who he was were gone. In the days that followed, he struggled to keep things together, both for himself and for his family. The pain of losing them was so deep that it felt like a part of him had died with them. But the show must go on, right? Jim Bob kept moving forward, throwing himself into his work to numb the pain. However, as he threw himself deeper into his career, Sue seemed to grow more distant. Jim Bob noticed it, but he couldn't place it. She became more interested in her appearance, spending more time at the gym and in beauty salons. At first, he brushed it off. She was grieving too, after all. But slowly he realized that something had changed in her. She was no longer the woman who stood by him, supporting him. She was becoming someone he didn't recognize. The distance between them grew, and soon Jim Bob began to question if it was his grief that had created a wedge, or if something deeper was at play. Sue's decision to undergo breast augmentation seemed to be the catalyst for everything that followed. At first, Jim Bob didn't think much of it. She wanted to feel better about herself, and he supported her. But soon, it became clear that the surgery wasn't just about physical change, it was about a deeper transformation. Sue became obsessed with her appearance, spending hours in front of the mirror, constantly worried about how she looked. She started wearing more revealing clothes and became more outgoing, often spending time with friends and strangers. The focus on her physical appearance became so consuming that Jim Bob began to feel like an outsider in his own marriage. What had once been a loving, supportive relationship now felt like a hollow shell. Jim Bob tried to talk to her about it, but Sue was always defensive, brushing off his concerns. She no longer seemed interested in the quiet, intimate moments they once shared. Her priorities had shifted, and Jim Bob was left wondering if he had lost her forever. Jim Bob's suspicions grew as he noticed Sue's erratic behavior late nights, unexplained absences, and a sense of detachment that he couldn't ignore. Unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Using a GPS tracker on Sue's car, Jim Bob discovered that she was spending time in places she never mentioned. His heart sank as he followed her one evening, hoping against hope that he was wrong. But there, parked outside a seedy motel, was Sue's car. His world crashed down around him. His wife, the woman he loved and trusted, was having an affair. The confrontation that followed was brutal. Sue didn't even try to deny it. She admitted to the affair, explaining that she felt neglected, that Jim Bob's grief had created a wall between them. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jim Bob had ever experienced. He didn't know how to react. All the love, the memories, the future they had planned shattered in an instant. The confrontation between Jim Bob and Sue was a storm that had been brewing for months. Sue didn't even try to hide her affair. The words spilled out, each one like a knife twisting in Jim Bob's chest. Her reasons were flimsy. She felt abandoned, she said. She was lonely. But as Jim Bob listened, each excuse felt more hollow than the last. Standing in their living room, the once shared space that was filled with love and family memories, Jim Bob couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sue had been having an affair in their home, the place where their son Lucas grew up. The betrayal felt unbearable. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had trusted her with everything, and now she was standing there, explaining away her betrayal as if it was just a misstep. Her affair wasn't just a physical act. It was an emotional betrayal that Jim Bob couldn't easily forgive. The love he thought was invincible had cracked under the weight of her lies. It wasn't just the affair that cut deep, it was the realization that she had been unfaithful in their home, a place that was supposed to be their sanctuary. Every piece of their relationship now felt tainted. He demanded answers. What had happened to the woman he married? Where had that deep connection gone? Sue's cold, almost dismissive attitude only made the pain worse. She didn't seem sorry, she seemed frustrated that Jim Bob didn't understand her pain. And as the truth of her actions sank in, Jim Bob knew he had to make a decision. He could never trust her again. Sheriff Bull, a man Jim Bob had known since childhood, enters the story as both a friend and a reluctant confidant. Bull had always been a steady presence in the small town, a man of authority, a man who had seen it all. But when Jim Bob's life began unraveling, Sheriff Bull found himself tangled in the mess as well. Bull wasn't just the sheriff, he had been a close friend to Jim Bob's parents and had watched Jim Bob grow up. His relationship with Jim Bob was built on mutual respect, but now, as the town buzzed with whispers of Jim Bob's crumbling marriage, Bull found himself walking a fine line between personal loyalty and his duties as a lawman. Bull had his own stories of friendship with Jim Bob, memories of simpler times, of days when Jim Bob's life was filled with hope and possibility. Now, as he watched his old friend's life spiral, Bull couldn't help but reflect on the changes in both Jim Bob and Sue. There was something darker happening beneath the surface of their perfect life, something that even Sheriff Bull couldn't ignore. And as the story unfolds, Bull offers more than just advice. He reveals truths about his own involvement in the town's darker dealings, showing just how far-reaching the consequences of Jim Bob's downfall were. The spiral that began with the affair only worsened when Sue was arrested. It was a cold night when Jim Bob received the call. Sue had been caught with drugs, caught up in a world she had fallen into after the affair. She was arrested in a hotel room, where she had been meeting with Leroy Jenkins, a local drug dealer who had become part of her chaotic life. Jim Bob could hardly believe it. His wife, the woman he had built a life with, was arrested for drug possession, and Leroy Jenkins, a name he had heard in passing but never thought would be connected to his family, was somehow involved. Sue, in her frantic phone call to Jim Bob, explained how things had escalated out of control. But the more she spoke, the more Jim Bob realized she was implicating herself and Leroy in a much deeper, more dangerous situation. Leroy Jenkins wasn't just a dealer. He was a fixture in the town's underground world, a man who had connections to people Jim Bob never wanted to know. Jim Bob's entire world was now intertwined with criminal activity, and it was all because of Sue's descent into this toxic spiral. The consequences were far-reaching, and Jim Bob knew that his family, his name, and his life were now on the line. As Jim Bob came to terms with Sue's arrest and betrayal, the next inevitable step was the divorce. The emotional devastation of the affair and her drug involvement had destroyed the foundation of their marriage. What was once a partnership built on love and mutual respect now felt like a broken shell. The legal battle that followed was nothing short of bitter. Jim Bob's lawyer worked through the details of the divorce, dealing with the complex division of assets, the custody of their son Lucas, and the fallout from Sue's arrest. It was clear that Sue's actions would have legal consequences that would affect them both. But beyond the legal implications, Jim Bob was faced with the harsh reality of losing everything he had worked so hard for: his family, his reputation, and the life he had once envisioned. Sue, meanwhile, fought for a larger settlement, desperate to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. But Jim Bob couldn't help but feel betrayed all over again. The money, the assets, it didn't matter anymore. He just wanted to protect his son and rebuild what was left of his shattered life. As the divorce papers were served, Jim Bob realized that this was just the beginning of a long, painful process. But one thing was certain: he couldn't stay trapped in a past that no longer existed. He had to move forward for his son, for his future. In the final moments of the story, Sheriff Bull looks back on everything that transpired, how Jim Bob's downfall impacted not just his own life, but the entire town. As the town's sheriff, Bull had always tried to keep the peace, but in this case, he couldn't help but profit from the chaos that surrounded Jim Bob and Sue's lives. Bull reflects on how the tragedy of Jim Bob's broken marriage, his wife's arrest, and the fallout from their life together changed the dynamic of the town. Jim Bob, once the golden boy, was now seen as a cautionary tale. And yet Sheriff Bull, despite being a lawman, couldn't help but see opportunity in the wreckage. As much as he might have cared for Jim Bob, he knew that in the world of law enforcement, chaos often led to personal gain. As the screen fades to black, Bull's voiceover reminds the audience that no one is immune to the price of betrayal. No matter how much money, power, or respect you have, love always has the potential to tear everything apart. Thanks for watching. If you've learned something from Jim Bob's journey, like and share this video. Comment your thoughts and experiences below, And don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.